Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished entrepreneur and an author from Calgary, Canada, Patricia Bathory. Patricia, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Ashutosh. I am very glad and happy and honored to be here.
Thank you. Patricia, as I said, is an author, and all of you know I'm always very partial to authors. She's an author of a book titled Connected: Building Relationships to Achieve Success and Make a Lasting Impact. Patricia is a psychotherapist and the founder and general manager of an import-export business, and she's a member of the YPO, which she and I share in common. So, Patricia, before we talk about your book, tell me about your own journey.
My own journey. Tell me a little bit about yourself. I don't know. I never know which cut to give. I'm Brazilian. I was born in Brazil to a Brazilian dad and a Slovak mom. So, that this whole
Yeah.
cultural thing has been very important in my life, like very different cultures. Raised in Brazil till I was 14. Then we moved to Canada, where I went to university, got my undergraduate degree, got my master's. And then, as fate would have it, I ended up marrying a Brazilian. So I met him while on vacation in Brazil. We married. We have two beautiful daughters. I lived in Brazil for about 15 years.
Hmm.
And then when the kids were growing up, I really wanted to give them the experience of living in Canada or experimenting Canada because I love it here. So pestered my husband and he agreed and eventually moved back to Canada in 2017. And
Oh,
we've been in Calgary since.
how wonderful. So let's talk about your book. Tell me what inspired you to write Connected, and how does your personal journey reflect in the book?
It's interesting because the process of writing a book, I find that it ended up being one big therapy session. I started wanting to write about gratitude because that's something I feel very deeply and that's something I'm very connected to.
Mhm.
And as I started organizing the book and writing about all the things I was grateful for, I started to realize that the biggest thing I had gratitude for were the relationships in my life.
Hmm.
So then I started to research more about relationships and their importance in other people's lives and how it impacts everything we do and the success we achieve. And then from there, it was a quick pivot into I wonder what's in relationships. What about relationships allow people to succeed? Is there a correlation? So then I started to research that a little bit more and found out that, yes, look at that. If you have good relationships, if you're surrounded by great people, then you do go further, then you have this support. And then I started interviewing friends and also with the experience of the clients that come, because I'm also a psychotherapist and I
Hmm.
see leaders who are struggling in their personal lives. So I started interviewing them and understanding from these client insights how their relationships impact every aspect of their lives. And I pivoted and I decided, you know what, this is what it's about. It's about relationships and how connected we are, and that really is what allows us to succeed and go further.
How wonderful. And how would you define success in the context of interpersonal relationships?
Wow, because I'm like, I had the answer for success in the context of interpersonal relationships. I think a successful relationship
Hmm.
is when you are able to see and be seen,
Hmm.
and where you don't necessarily look for agreement or convincing, but where you can have mutual understanding of each other's values, of each other's points of view, of each other's priorities.
Hmm. Well said. And based on all the work that you did for your book, what are some common misconceptions people have about building a successful relationship?
I think the biggest misconception people have about relationships is that we're entitled to them.
Hmm.
As in, you're born, here's your parents, we're going to get along. Here's my partner. We met, we got married, we're super in love. We're going to love each other for the rest of our lives. He's the one meant for me, that there is such a thing. And I think that's the biggest misconception, because then it puts you in a position where you're not working on the relationship. And relationships by themselves, they don't thrive. They only grow, they only get better, and they only get strong if you actually invest in them. And I think that is the part that people, when they realize, that's when they do that pivotal change, and the relationships really improve. When they realize that, you have to work at it, you do have to invest in spending the time in understanding, in repairing whatever ruptures you may have along the way. And when you realize that, that's when relationships do tend to grow stronger and longer, and how conflict gets resolved.
Great response. Thank you. And Patricia, what are some of the qualities you believe that in a relationship that can significantly impact one's path to success
In life or in the relationship?
in a relationship?
The qualities that will make you successful in your relationships, I think I would stick to two. I think the most important ones. One is the ability to listen, and listen to understand, and not listen waiting for your turn to talk. And the second quality would be curiosity, as in your ability to be curious about what is that person bringing, and what is that they're saying, and being curious despite not agreeing with what it is that they're saying. And I think if you can use these two qualities, then you can pretty much overcome anything, because sometimes you don't agree. But if you're curious to try to understand, why is it that you think differently? Why is it that you see the world from a different perspective? If you take that time, and if you're curious to find out why, then
Right.
you end up really becoming better, and also, as a consequence, strengthening that relationship.
Well said. My next question is, how does your own background in psychotherapy influence your understanding of relationship dynamics?
The biggest advantage of being a psychotherapist is because I have an endless flow of examples every day.
Yeah.
Right. So with the clients that I see, if I look at the common denominator of what is causing them problems, a lot of times is relationships. People are having issues getting along with their partners, with their children, with their family of origin, with the in-laws. So I have a constant flow of examples of difficulties, what people struggle with.
Right.
And as I'm brainstorming with my clients, what I find is that they sometimes have the biggest and the greatest insights that they share of what worked, what didn't work. So it's like I live in a lab, and I get this endless source of material in every day. So that would be the biggest advantage of being a psychotherapist when it comes to even research, because I'll research about it, and then I'll try to apply, or I'll try to share some of that research that I found with my clients, and then they try to implement those strategies, and they come back with feedback. So it really is something very dynamic at the office, and it's wonderful.
Thank you. Could you also talk to me a little bit about the concept of the village needed to leave a legacy? And you talk about this in your book.
I talk about this in the book. I came across the African proverb, "It takes a village to raise a child," just as I had my first child in 2002. So she was born, and you're raising a child, and I don't know, I think it was a book or a children's book or something. I came across that title, and I thought it was fascinating, because I'm like, yes, absolutely. Because then I realized how much help I needed, and how I did not know anything. And as much as I was winging it, there were people much more experienced that could help me in that situation. And then as my children were growing, I understood fully what that meant, in the sense of, it's about the caregivers, it's about the teachers, it's about the therapists, it's about the neighbors' kids. So that was already a saying that was very dear to my heart. But then, as I started thinking about my own life and my path and the things that I achieved, and I started paying attention at my clients, at some of my clients, at some of my friends, the ones that had achieved success as well, I noticed that them too, they had a huge village that allowed them to move forward.
Right.
And by yourself in a vacuum, you don't achieve much,
Hmm.
because if somebody doesn't have your back, whether physically really pushing you forward or subjectively, like just giving you that moral support, or when you want to stumble, or when you're having those doubts, somebody who's there believing in you when you don't believe in yourself yet, somebody who believes in you more than you believe in yourself in that moment. That is the village that you need to accomplish
Right.
anything,
Right.
anything. And it's interesting because I came up with that concept as I started writing the book. And then it became stronger and stronger throughout the book, because
Hmm.
writing the book was an experiment in feeling the fact that I needed that village to actually write the book. I
Hmm.
wrote the book. I'm not a writer by formation, so I needed a book coach. So I had this editor who I would write, and she, not an editor actually, she was a book coach. She would look at what I wrote and she would fix it and give suggestions. And, so that was somebody who helped me with. And
Hmm.
then I'd give it to my brother, who would look it over and give me tips on, well, no, this is not very clear. You know what? You should add this. You should add an exercise here. You should,
Yeah.
giving me. So, and then on top of this, I'm writing until super late. So my husband is doing dinner a few more weeks than he usually does in a week. So it is, if it's not all of these
Yeah.
people supporting you in your endeavors, the book wouldn't have been done. So the
Absolutely.
book is a crystal clear example of how it does take a village. And
Absolutely.
then in it, I speak about all these people and all that they have accomplished because of their village. So
Hmm.
all of the examples that I bring make
Hmm.
that point very clear.
Hmm. Well, maybe your next book can be takes a village to actually be able to publish a successful book, So
Yeah, exactly. It'll be
all
a
the
how to write a
support that
book.
you get.
A, get a village. B, then start.
Absolutely. So my next question, Patricia, is how do authenticity and trust serve as the foundation for strong relationships based on your findings?
Authenticity and trust. They're pillars, because I always talk about the math of the energy. The energy that you spend
Mhm.
pretending to be somebody that you're not.
Mhm.
The energy that you spend not being authentic,
Mhm.
building up this persona to show up with, is can be such a wasted resource. You can
Mhm.
take that energy and invest in the actual relationship. So
Mhm.
if you can show up authentically without barriers, without all this defense, and show up really who you are, it just is an economy that then you can use that energy for the actual connection. Trust has to do with, it's hard to show up with authenticity if you don't trust,
Mhm.
because I think that's also the basis for being able to show up as you are and show up with that vulnerability. So if there's no trust, then automatically you are more reserved, you are more defended. So you're not going to show up in the best version that you can be. Um, so then I talk about the relationships and what do you do when you don't have trust and authenticity? And the idea is to, can you bring that into the relationship? Can you have a talk about that? Can you then maybe be the one who starts first acting with trust and authenticity, and see if the other person copies that behavior, or if that behavior can be changing
Mhm.
for that dynamic? If so, that is great. But if not, then, well, think about that relationship as a whole. Is it something worth staying in or investing in, or maybe just putting it, taking it from a main stage and putting it a little bit to the side? Because those are not the relationships that tend to thrive or push you forward or even be helpful.
Hmm. Fascinating. My next question is on the reality that all of us are now facing because of technology, because of COVID. Work from home is now becoming uh, a reality or
Mhm,
almost like a norm.
mhm.
I'd love to get your thoughts on how is work from home changing relationships at work and at home?
I think the work from home, the change began even before. I think that the change began when social media became so ubiquitous, because these relationships, we have become, we forget that the connection that we need is actually person to person. Now, I do like the flexibility that working from home provides. And I find what I've been reading is that research that shows that companies that have that flexibility that allow you to work from home, that the workforce is happier. So I think that is very important. So it's not the working from home and it's not the social media, is what we need to have is a discipline to maintain structures that keep us in contact with each other, that keep us connected. So, of course, there's a set of skills that you need to know when you're relating to other people, but you need the structures to put the skills into use. And what I mean by structures is, you can work from home, but maybe we'll have a weekly meeting that it's mandatory. We'll work from home and then we'll have that weekly meeting on a Monday, let's say. And then on Friday, we have the last check-in with everyone also in person. You have these structures where one of these meetings, the second half of it is where we don't talk about work. We talk about everything but. So you need to have these structures where we keep the connections alive, where we strengthen these bonds and these connections. So it's not the working from home and it's
Yeah.
not the social media. It's the fact that we have deprioritized our own necessity of actual real contact with each other.
Fascinating perspective. Thank you. My next question is, how do you recommend bridging compatibility gaps in relationships, especially in diverse teams or communities?
Especially in diverse teams. I think teams being the biggest word because teams implies work and work implies a lack of choice. So you're put with these people, you don't have a choice of leaving, right? So if you have a friend and you're not getting along, you can choose to exit that relationship. At work, of course, you can always exit work, but it becomes a little bit more challenging. You have to be able to work with these individuals. The compatibility gaps can be bridged with curiosity and good listening skills.
Right.
I find that curiosity is at the bottom of really overcoming a lot of these differences, whether they're generational, whether they're cultural, whether they're from anything really. What you need to understand is why does that person think that way? Why does that person have that point of view? Why is it that this person in my team believes that this solution is better than mine? Right? And not actually get defended when they start suggesting, but actually take a position of curiosity instead of defense. Because maybe what they say adds to what you're saying.
Right.
Maybe what they say is an improvement to what you say. So maybe it's not this or that, but it's and. And the better solution comes from you understanding that part and actually implementing that to your idea and making it something new and more powerful and more successful. So I find that this is how you bridge really these gaps.
Right.
Posture of curiosity, and then, of course, listening, but listening with a posture of curiosity.
Well said. And how do you envision readers applying the principles of connected to make a meaningful difference in the world?
Connected. So when I was writing the book, I'll give you some interesting information about it. First of all, was about talking to people who are successful and, how do your relationships impact your success? And the first definition was of success when I picked the people I was going to interview was, okay, who has entrepreneurial success and success in their personal lives? To me, there was the people who had the balance of professional and personal. So that was my first filter. Who am I going to interview? Because I find that some people have one, some people have the other, but getting those two forms of success was a little bit harder. Then my list became smaller. But then for one reason or another, I started talking about purpose and I started got all existential and the meaning of life and why are we here? And, if we don't leave a legacy, and legacy not in the sense of changing the world, but in the sense of contributing as small a contribution as it is, but leaving the world a little bit of a better place when you leave than how you found. And then, of course, the list gets even smaller. And I found these wonderful people that had success in their personal lives,
Mm-hmm.
successful in their entrepreneurial lives, and then that they had managed to leave that something extra
Mm.
for humanity and not just for their descendants. It's like, no, some of these people have left programs that make it better for kids with disadvantages to get glasses. That's my example in chapter 1. And then now he has a program with gifting for kids who have disability, or so different types of programs. Another one talks about servant leadership. She's also a YPO.
Mm.
She's my chapter 7. She's a brilliant lady, and the way she looks at serving, she calls it servant leadership, and she calls herself the chief purpose officer of her company,
Yep.
and it's just amazing. So that's what I really consider success. It's the ability to,
Yep.
it's that extra level. So success in your personal life, success in your professional life, and contributing to the world and leaving this place better than you found it.
Well said. So, Patricia, I have time for 2 more questions. My next question is, what's the most important message you hope readers will take away from Connected?
The most important message, I want people to finish the book and feel hopeful,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that relationships are repairable,
Mm.
that there is a roadmap to make relationships work.
Mm.
It's not an art necessarily, it's actually a science.
Mm.
If you tune up your skills, right? If you do these minor behavior adjustments,
Mm.
if you implement the right structures, the meetings, the connection opportunities, and if you can align your standards, as in being a good person, leaving a legacy,
Mm.
if you can have this framework in your life, then for sure you'll be able to succeed in your most important relationships.
Mm.
Because what I find as a therapist is that people come to my office and they're so heartbroken, and there's so much suffering because they are having difficulties in their personal relationships, and sometimes relationships at work as well, that throws off all of their happiness. It's almost like their happiness in
Yep.
all the other realms gets affected by not getting along with their boss or their
Mm.
spouse or whatever it is. So the idea with the book is to read and give the reader hope that, you know what, maybe if one, I adjust these behaviors in myself, or
Mm.
two, I evaluate these relationships, and maybe some of these are not for me. Am I surrounding myself with people who are not helping me?
Right.
Helping you maybe let go of some of these,
Right.
or improve the other ones that are great for you.
Right.
So that is my biggest goal,
Yeah.
because it is the cornerstone of really a happy life, is because we're relational creatures.
Fascinating.
So if we have our relationships working for us, then we can get along, we can succeed.
Fascinating. And my last question to you, can you, for my viewers and listeners, share a story from your book that highlights the transformative power of relationships?
The transformative power. There's a couple that I see. I still see them every once in a while, but I've started seeing them. It was probably one of my first clients. And it's not going to be about the transformative power of relationships, because I don't want to give you a happy ending story where they
Yep.
lived happily ever after.
Mhm.
It is a story of separation. It is a
Mhm.
story of divorce, but it's a happy story because it was a couple that were so in love and so intense, and everything was so aligned. And then their first child is born, and then they start fighting. It's Trevor and Bella. It's their fictitious name. That's how I call them in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
book. It's chapter
Mhm.
5 and 6. And as they separate, they can't see eye to eye, as it happens a lot of times.
Mhm.
And they fight. And Trevor has this mental tattoo of Bella, that she is a beep, beep, right? Like he just has the worst words for her. And, all of our work has to do with this resentment and this anger that he carries for her. And he cannot, talk about her without using these really harsh words, until one day something clicks, you know, and we've been talking about this. Can you reframe the way you look at her? Can you reframe the way you see her? And one day he, you know, it's a long story, but he sees her advocating for their son at a basketball game and how passionate she is about it and how she reams out the coach and she gets so in his face and you know, and she's like, and he's like, well, there she is again, that she's being bossy, she's being pushy. And something clicked. And he's like, yes, she's being pushy and she's being bossy, but really, she is the biggest advocate for my son in this world. Nobody loves him like she does. This is her way of expressing that love. So the day he was able to reframe this, he reframed her from bleep bleep to a very compassionate. No, it's a where he uses the not a compassionate caregiver or an intense or a caregiver that's just very committed, a committed caregiver. And that's how he reframed her in his mind.
Amazing.
And that set him free. And so, you know, when I give an example of what we can do with our relationships is get away from a place of anger and resentment and just not getting along to reframe the other person's actions and them in our eyes so that then you can look at them and actually enjoy what they're doing and actually understand. And again, that piece of understanding. And they have a much, much better relationship today. Every once in a while, they come in for check-ins because they still co-parent the boy together. And it's an amazing example of how to separate well.
Wow.
And surprisingly, because it was one of my worst couples when they began. So it is transformative, the power of learning how to relate even when you're not in those relationships anymore.
Amazing. What an amazing story, Patricia. Thank you for sharing the story with me and my viewers and listeners. But on that note, Patricia, thank you so much for speaking to me about your own incredible journey from Brazil to Canada. Thank you for talking to me about your book, Connected: Building Relationships to Achieve Success and Make a Lasting Impact. I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Patricia's book. I will do the same. Thank you for speaking to me at such length about so many different aspects of relationships, success, and lasting impact. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck.
No, thank you. It was my pleasure and honor to participate here today.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.